All right. Welcome, Dr. Dominguez. We're so honored, and it's a privilege that you were willing to share your time today to talk about something near and dear to my heart, conservation. And all we can hope is that it becomes more and more important to a lot of other people too, because we know how important it is to save our beloved parrots in the wild, not just in our homes. So I'm going to turn it over to you. And by the way, we work with Dr. Dominguez at the Bell Creek Hospital in the Richmond area. So if you live in that area, there's a great opportunity for you to have an avian vet nearby. So anyway, I'll see you at the end for Q&A.
Thank you so much, Anne, and thank you to Phoenix Landing for allowing me today to talk a little bit about conservation, how between owners and veterinarians, we can actually help a lot of avian species, not just our beloved parrots in the wild. So let's get started. Today we're going to talk a little bit about why it is important conservation and what is the background currently of avian species and the trade of avian species and parrot species. What is really conservation? What does conservation means? How owners and veterinarians can get involved in conservation through different opportunities, not just coming to a vet's office for checking your parrot's welfare, your parrot's health, or when they're sick to try to resolve those illnesses, but also how supporting research can help also conservation and can help actually your parrots at home, but also how you as owners can also do research. There's a lot of what we call citizen science or citizen research that actually help a lot of people having better knowledge about different avian species. Also, how wildlife rehabilitation can play a role in the conservation of avian species, what is responsible aviculture, and why aviculture sometimes has helped the conservation of parrots, but also has affected conservation of parrots. And finally, what is this One Health concept where we are all connected and there's this relation between human health, the environment health, and our love animals health. So let's get started. So why is this topic so important? And why is it important for you as a parrot owner and a person that loves birds to know about? We have a huge conservation problem of avian species. Millions of live birds are traded illegally and sold in the live pet trade, mainly in the United States and Europe. Other birds are also traded for falconry or as feathers and other parts and products, and that happens mainly in the Middle East and Asian countries. And parrots, sadly, are amongst the most endangered species of birds. So we have around 10,000 species of birds, and parrots are highly endangered, not just because how smart they are, because the connection that we have with these species, but also because they have a really high value in the market. Conservation is a problem from anywhere from collectors to pet owners. And sometimes us as pet owners affect conservation of these species sometimes when we don't know exactly where is the best place to acquire a bird, if that bird is an endangered species or not, when we don't know if that bird has been bred in captivity or has been caught in the wild and pouched and then sold in the pet industry. And just so you have an idea, the United Nations does a wildlife crime report every year, and in 2024, just 751 species of birds were recorded in seizures between 2015 and 2021. And this is official data of animals that were actually confiscated or seized. But we know there are so many other species and so many other animals that unfortunately are not officially reported because they still pass through airports and borders and everything and get into the illegal pet trade. So wildlife trade also poses a high risk for us in terms of health because there's a lot of cross species mixing. There's novel viruses and bacteria and microbes that start being shared between these species and with humans and other domestic species that can affect the threat of humans. One of them is avian flu. COVID at some point was a perfect example where we know that some of these virus, like coronavirus, came from the wild and then started mutating and affecting humans. In terms of how many animals, based on the taxonomic groups, are declining every year, we see that birds are in the fourth place. The first place is of amphibians, and that's mainly because of um, habitat destruction. Then reef corals, believe it or not, they are not just being destroyed in the oceans, but also are traded illegally for many purposes, but mainly for medicinal purposes, then mammals, and finally birds. So how do clinicians and owners help the conservation of these animals? When we are treating birds, we're not just treating a bird or a parrot or a pet. We're treating an animal that most people really love, had a big attachment, and in most parrot species, it's going to be a lifetime commitment. Sometimes even these parrots lose their owners, and they need to be passed by generations. So we are treating not just these birds, but we're also helping families, educating them, and making sure that they are happy with a healthy bird. And if we have happier owners, we have happier birds. It's always an opportunity when you guys acquire a bird, have a bird, come to these kind of conversations or go to the vet clinic. It is an opportunity to both educate the veterinarians, but also veterinarians to be able to educate clients. We can help with clinical research. Every time that a pet owner allows a clinician to run blood work in their birds, take x-rays, do new surgical techniques, those kind of things, all that information that is collected in vet clinics can help with the research so we can improve how we do medicine in avian species. And some of those things that we learn in captivity can be translated in the wild to help wild populations. Of course, wildlife rehabilitation, where is bringing animals into a setting with the sole purpose of making them healthy again and releasing them back into the wild, helps conservation. And then knowing what is real and responsible aviculture, where aviculture is the breeding of animals in captivity with different purposes. But one of those purposes is preventing animals to come in the wild so we can continue supplying for the pet industry. But also aviculture has help, and there's multiple examples of breeding animals so then they can be released back into the wild and these populations can have healthy numbers back. And finally, the One Health concept that we'll talk more about it in 1 second. So how can owners help in conservation? Well, the more you guys, every person that has a bird or is interested in having a bird is more informed and educated, you guys are going to make better decisions, not just for that individual or the couple of individuals that you have at home, but also you will make more responsible decisions in your life to affect as little as possible those animals that are still in the wild. Every time that we share experiences and knowledge, like in platforms like we are having today with Phoenix Landing, that always helps, again, not just that individual bird that is in our house, but also it might help animals that are in the wild. And sometimes there's little things that we don't think about, but just using, for example, pesticides in our house or in our yard because we really want this green, nice yard in our backyard, that can have a real effect in wild birds and in populations. Of course, every time that you care for your birds, that means that if you care for your bird, you have a healthy bird, that bird is going to live longer, then there's going to be less need to acquire a new bird sooner. If you guys as owners also support conservation efforts, specifically of the species that you love, so if you love scarlet macaws or you love cockatoos or cockatiels or even lovebirds, all those animals, there is a lot of conservation and field projects to keep those animals in the wild and keep surviving there. Every time that you adopt an animal, I make the conscious decision of adopting an animal instead of buying an animal on the pet trade. You're helping the conservation of this species. And again, knowing more about the one-tail concept that we are going to talk more about in a few minutes. So what is conservation? Conservation is, first of all, the careful maintenance and upkeep of a natural resource, prevent it from disappearing. And a natural resource is defined as a physical supply of something that exists in nature. So how can we do conservation? If we carefully keep the habitats and the resources that are there, and we prevent these species, plants, animals, and things from disappearing. To give an example, if we prevent more African gray parrots to get poached from the wild and come into the pet trade, we are preventing that species from disappearing. If we promote conservation efforts from those natural areas, then we upkeep that natural resource and we can make sure that it's cared and maintained adequately. So there's two types of conservation that we know nowadays. One is called in situ, where we try to conserve those ecosystems and natural habitats in their natural surroundings and make sure that we recover viable populations. And when we're talking about viable populations, this means that we are trying to make sure that the genetic component of that population is healthy enough to keep growing and to have a genetic diversity. Ex situ conservation is when a viable population gets brought outside the natural habitat and has projects to continue breeding them with the purpose of releasing them back into the wild at some point. Now, I want to clarify that ex situ conservation is always about viable populations. That means that it's populations that need to have diversity in genetics, that is populations that will be in the future able to be released into the wild and survive in the wild so they can keep growing those numbers in the wild. Ex situ conservation is not just breeding parrots for breed parrots in captivity. We need to make sure that we bring some of these animals in captivity and we have a population viable that can be released back into the wild. When we talk about a specific of avian conservation, every time that we protect the habitat and we protect nature or we admire nature, we are helping conservation. When we understand better how the animal trade works around the world and that how is that affecting avian species, when we are improving agricultural practices, so believe it or not, every time that you buy organic food versus not organic, or more responsible ways of producing produce and meat, that is also helping conservation. When we reduce human causes of damaging to the nature or avian species, for example, when we prevent oil spills, when big buildings with big windows, make sure that those windows are protected in a way to prevent window strikes of different avian species. When there is migration season, we're turning off the lights of our streets and our houses and our cities and helping the migration of thousands of birds. All of those kind of things is helping conservation. Of course, every time that we do education and we share more information with people, and every time you bring your parrot to a vet clinic and we improve that animal's health, we are also helping with conservation. So let's talk more about conservation in the clinic. So how those clinicians and veterinarians, but you as owners can help do clinical work and that clinical work then be translated to conservation? Well, every time that we help with the health of avian patients as pets or in captive collections or in breeding collections, we make sure that these animals are healthy enough, not just to live long lives, but also to prevent those animals to continue coming out from the wild. The other way is diagnosing avian diseases. So every time that you bring your sick bird, it doesn't matter if it's a parrot, it can be also a chicken or a pigeon or any other kind of bird. Every time that we diagnose an avian disease, if we catch it on time, we can actually see trends of that disease and make sure that there's no outbreaks of specific diseases that can affect not just the birds in captivity and in your house, but also birds in the wild. We can also develop novel treatments. So the more birds are coming to vet clinics and the more veterinarians are training avian medicine, and you guys push harder for us to do new things and better treatments for these birds, then that information and those skills and techniques keep improving to improve the health of your birds, but also to, in the future, being techniques that can be applied in the field and in rehabilitation centers to then help animals in the wild. So again, if we have healthy pets, you guys are going to be happier, right? You all want to be seeing your bird always happy and living as long as possible. And if you guys are happier, that not just helps your mental health, but also makes you improve the welfare of your pets. Every time that your pet is happier and interacts more with you and gives you joy and emotional support, you want to give some of that back to your pet. So every time that you guys are in a better health, you also want for your pet to be healthier, and vice versa. Every time your pet is healthier, you're less worried about your pet. That pet can be more attached to you and give you more love and emotional support. Therefore, you will care more for each other. So happier pets are happier owners, and healthier pets are healthier owners. Also, the longer these animals survive, the less demand there's going to be for them in the wild. And then there's always, always, always an opportunity for education. Our birds teach us a lot of things, and we can also teach other people if they want to have birds. What are the challenges and opportunities and joy of having a pet bird, but also seeing these animals out in the wild? And here is just an example of what something in the clinic could have an impact also in the wild. So there is this one doctor that decided to do a different type of surgical repair or surgery to repair a femur or hip and leg luxation or dislocation in a bird. And the more these kind of things get reported and more clinicians try to do new things, then we can treat more birds and master those skills to help other birds. But also these techniques can also be used in wildlife centers or in the field to help those birds that are sick or injured. So let's talk a little bit about education. So there's a lot of education for you guys, for owners, but I think always one important thing that you as owners already of a pet should be sharing and educated future owners is, why do we want a bird as a pet? Why do I want a parrot as a pet? What are the real reasons? Do I want them as a pet because of the joy they give me? Do I want them as a pet just because I think is the best pet for my little kid? Do I want them just to have a companion animal? What are the reasons behind having a bird as a pet? And if you're experienced bird owners, you might want to share that information with new pet owners and explain to them the challenges of having different types of species, because it's not the same having a budgie than an African gray, than an Amazon, than a cockatoo, than a conure, than a macaw, than an eclectus. All of those species, even when they're all in the parrot group, have complete different needs. They give us complete different emotional support, different interactions, those kind of things. Then once we have decided why we want a bird as a pet, where is the best place to get it? From a pet store, from a breeder, adopting a bird, inheriting a bird. If birds have been in my family and I know grandma's Amazon parrot needs to be passed to the family and I want to get that bird, what are the needs for that bird? And finally, what is the conservation status? You will see that most of the avian species that we have in the pet trade, believe it or not, they are endangered in the wild. Almost all the species that you're seeing right now in this slide, their numbers are declining in the wild, and some of them are highly endangered, like conures and Amazon parrots and African greys and eclectus. So knowing the conservation status of these species is also important because if we continue promoting the pet ownership of certain species, we'll continue promoting the illegal poaching of them when aviculture is not enough to supply the demand of these birds. When we know about avian welfare, so how we can have our birds happier and in better shape, when we know what are the legalities of owning a bird, we know also how some of these birds can transmit diseases to us, but us, we can transmit diseases to them. And we also need to know what are going to be always our expectations of owning a bird. So something important for you and that I want to continue explaining during this presentation is how you guys can support avian conservation, how there's little things that you can do at home to help the conservation of these species. And finally, how you can also help your local community, your neighbors, your family to know more about conservation and help with conservation efforts in that little community. Call it your neighbors, your family, your city, your county, the school where your kids go to, your place of work, all those kind of things. There's ways to share information so people can keep enjoying these amazing animals at home, but also in the wild. So one of the ways to help conservation, for example, is knowing when is the migratory bird day every year in the US. So we have always one during the spring where birds move from the south to the north. And then when those birds also move from the north to the south to pass winter. Okay. But other simple things that we can do at home, right? All of you that have birds know the importance of having certain conditions in your house so that those birds don't get sick. So if you know that the air is healthy in your house, it's probably going to be healthier for your bird. If you minimize using certain types of pollutants in your house, like smokes or Teflon or pesticides or aerosols or essential oils and a lot of those things, you know also that you're going to keep your bird healthier. But guess what? Every time that you also don't buy all of those things, you're helping to keep a cleaner environment and a cleaner habitat when we are preventing those pollutants that we know in our house are bad for our birds. We are also reducing the consumption of those. Therefore, there will be less out there that will be discarded. Simple things like this image on your left and your right that says protecting insects is protecting birds. So every time that we reduce the amount of insects and pesticides that we're using, then a lot of the avian species that depend on these insects to survive, then will not be affected. If you use pesticides to kill a lot of mosquitoes and bees and other considered pests in our yards or in our homes, when these avian species eat or consume those animals, they will get intoxicated and sadly they will die. Also, for other pests, like, for example, the control of rodents like mice and rats, if we're not responsible of how we put these baits or we use these rodenticides or rat poisoning supplies, then some of these animals can actually get intoxicated and died in the wild. So those are little actions that you already as a bird owner can do at home just to keep helping other avian species, not always necessarily a parrot, but other avian species. And the more avian species and a healthy environment we have, then the better will be at the end in areas where parrots live. Keeping cats indoors. So if you're a bird lover and a bird owner and you have a pet, a parrot pet, but you have an outdoor cat, sadly, that outdoor cat has an impact for avian species. Now, this is not a cat issue. The problem is not the cat that wants to be outdoor, and now that it has learned to be outdoor, not being willing to come indoors and not destroying our house. The problem is a people issue where we decided that these domesticated animals were okay to be outside because we think they will be happier or healthier. But actually, research has shown that they are not healthier and that they can still live really happy lives inside our house. We are okay with leaving stray cats, but you guys will never be okay with letting a stray dog live out there because of the challenges that that dog will have. Well, those same challenges are being happening by a cat. The difference is that we're more used to it. And other things like I told you, like during World Migratory Bird Day, just turning our lights off. Light pollution, believe it or not, affects thousands of birds every year in their migratory patterns. They get confused when they see certain lights and they don't know where to go. They don't know how to migrate correctly. And that affects the migration of these species. But also, if some species decide not to migrate and stay in certain areas, that can be probably in terms of increase of diseases because those species are not spreading the way they should be spreading around. They start getting together in areas where normally they will not be together, and the spread of diseases can happen easier. Clinical research. So clinical research is what clinicians we can do in terms of research or data collection to improve the health of animals. So we can do a lot of research in terms of epidemiology or surveillance of diseases, knowing specific microbes or viruses or bacteria, ecotoxicology, that is learning like how all these toxins in the environment can affect birds, and doing comparative medicine between different species. But that's what clinicians can do. And because of that, we know better drugs to treat your animals. We know better anatomic differences between parrot species and avian species. And then we can provide better care for those animals in captivity and have better nutrition, for example, for different parrot species. Like 30 years ago, we thought that a bird was a bird and we can feed all the birds the same, or we can feed all the parrots the same. Nowadays, we know that it's not the same needs of an Amazon, that a cockatiel, that an eclectus, or a lorikeet. They have complete different needs in terms of nutrition and also drugs to treat diseases, those kind of things. But one thing that you can do as an owner and you can do at home and your family can do and your community can do is something that's called citizen science. So one application that is designed by the Cornell Ornithology Lab is called eBird Science. And if you go to that website, you can see everything that citizens have helped in all these different countries to know more about the birds, know where they are being distributed, to have better counts of populations, to know if they are like improving in the wild or they are declining in the wild. Things about how to prevent certain toxins in certain areas. All of these has been done by citizens. So this is a great app that you can download in your phone, but also a great website where you can see everything that has been around the world and in different parts of the world to help birds, not just in captivity, but also in the wild. So for example, something that they just posted has how the participation of people, just counting birds that come to their backyards is helping conservation, and how you can participate on that. So if you have, for example, the eBird app, every time that you see a bird in your backyard, you can take a picture with that eBird app, then upload the picture. It will try to figure out which species it is, and then it will count that species on that specific geographic area. So that way we can know better things about those birds. Of course, wildlife rehabilitation. So every time that we bring animals into a wildlife rehabilitation setting, we're not just helping those individuals to be returned back into the wild, but every time an individual comes to a wildlife rehabilitation center, it brings us information about what's happening in the environment. So we know better what diseases are happening out there for these birds. What are the causes why these birds are coming to wildlife rehabilitation centers? So how much is a human impact on that? How much is the environmental toxins and pollution impacting these birds? And with some of that information, we can also learn what could be the potential future impacts for human health. And a perfect example of that is avian flu. So if we detect avian flu early on in wildlife rehabilitation centers, then we can take measurements to prevent the spread of avian flu in the future for human populations and other domestic species. A lot of wildlife rehabilitation studies how many humans are impacting these species. We can detect early diseases. We can monitor the health of these species, but they also improve population numbers when they're releasing these species back into the wild. And there's a lot of things where we thought at some point that we were helping the environment and we were really responsible, but that nowadays we know that has affected avian species. Solar panels, wind turbines, a lot of what was considered healthy or eco-friendly energy, now we know that can have actual impacts in habitats and in a lot of different species, not just birds. Aviculture. So aviculture is the science of breeding animals in captivity or birds in captivity for different purposes. But there's a difference between responsible aviculture and not responsible aviculture. So aviculture and conservation. So aviculture can help breeding endangered species. They can design best practices for breeding other species. So best practices for breeding some of those birds that need to come and supply the demand of pet birds that are needed. It can also talk about best practices to trade these species, because I will show you a couple of pictures of how sometimes these animals get transported from that breeder to the pet store and then finally into your hands. And of course, best practices for avian welfare, so we can keep these animals in the best health and mental status. So this is the reality of a lot of non-responsible aviculture. Because we know that the pet trade is so big and the demand is so big, we are not just poaching a lot of animals out in the wild and moving them from their original countries to richer countries like the United States, but even if they are bred in captivity, just to move them quick and cheaper, because this becomes a business, then we start putting all these animals in little cages, selling them at early ages, sick, without the adequate nutrition and the adequate husbandry or space they need. So all of these are pictures, not just of illegal wildlife trade, but also of legal trade, okay? Some of those boxes that you see on the top or the top left cages that you see, those are animals that are legally bred with somebody that has a license and a permit and move these animals around to different pet stores. And this is just an example of how diseases can be spread, how animals are treated badly, and they will at the end get into your hands. And some of these animals, because of these experiences, then they have abnormal behaviors that we see a lot in captivity. All this causes a lot of health issues for these animals, but also mental and behavioral issues for all these animals that then affect how is your relationship with that pet bird at home. And finally, in some pet stores, these things can happen, right? So a pet store that doesn't have the adequate preventive measurements and those kind of things, there's birds that get affected by a fire, for example, and they need to be rescued. But you can see in this pet store like how those animals were in small cages, not well taken care of. And on top of that, there was a fire where they had a smoke inhalation, those kind of things, and most of these animals would not survive after an event like this. But there's aviculture that is responsible, and there's a lot of stories of successful aviculture. There's a lot of responsible breeders that will breed animals correctly and treat them correctly to supply the pet trade demand. But there's also a lot of these practices that we have learned for the pet trade that now has helped us to conserve other species. The Sphinx macaw is a perfect example how this breeding program in captivity has helped us now to slowly reintroduce them back into the rainforest in Brazil. The California condor and the Andean condor are others. And then knowing more about certain other species that we love having, like even pigeons and parrots and those kind of things, the more information we collect in captivity through these breeders, and these breeders improve their practices and nutrition and those kind of things, these animals can be healthier, can still be supplying the pets trade, and can prevent possibly in the future these and the wild animals to be brought into captivity to supply the demand of pet trade. Finally, what is the One Health concept? So One Health is the correlationship between the human health, the animal health, and the environmental. And we know that nowadays we have transferred around a third to one half of our planet Earth, affecting a lot of different species with the only purpose of improving the productivity, agriculture, and human activities. But all this has had an impact not just in the health of the environment, but also in the health of animals and in the health of humans. So we call that we are now in something that's called the Anthropocene era, where around 100 to 1,000 times species are being disappearing yearly faster than any other times. We know that agriculture play a big role in destruction of habitat, but also other things like poaching animals, inadequate human practices have really increased how many species are disappearing out there in the wild. So what is the One Health? It's a sustainable approach that helps us to understand better how different efforts can help humans, animals, and ecosystems. It's a strategy that is a multidisciplinary or transdisciplinary strategy where not just human doctors and veterinarians and pet owners and farmers help, but also sociologists to understand how that community has certain needs and how those needs can be met, still helping the environment and helping species. And it's also important to understand that sometimes One Health can be jeopardized when we try to prevail the health of one area versus the other. So for example, if we think that for the sake of keeping humans healthier, we need to destroy X or Y ecosystems or X or Y animals, yes, we're improving the human health, but we're reducing the animal health and the environmental health, and that at the end is going to have a negative impact again on us. So this approach is just telling us how if we are more sustainable, if we are more holistic, and we consider all the parts and we try to do the right things for all the parts, then we probably will have a better health for everyone. And here's an example of that relationship. So how bird flu has been spreading. So we know that bird flu started in wild birds. Then the contact of wild birds with poultry made poultry outbreaks, and that was affecting humans. But now we know also that dairy cows are affected, that also affects cats, and at the end, more humans are having more contact than with cows, with cats, with raw milk, all those kind of things. So at the end, not having healthy wild populations has make bird flu to increase. Therefore, bird flu has now mutated to affect more species and has or poses a big risk for human health. So this is a perfect example of how when we didn't take care of the environment and wild bird populations now is affecting the human health. But what else can we do as owners? And I want to end with this. We can help and support conservation projects. We can understand that avian species and most exotic pets and birds are more beautiful in the wild and they have the right to flight. We can also support organizations like Phoenix Landing that they don't just do adoptions for parrots. They really put a lot of the money that you guys give with every adoption to help conservation efforts for these animals in the wild. And there's so many other projects. Okay, there's the One Earth Conservation. There's the SAFE project from zoos that are accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. There's the World Parrot Trust, the American Bird Conservancy, the IUCN, Audubon Society, so many others that helping all these projects really help to keep your birds better, but most important, these animals still pretty and healthy in the wild. You can also support research through different organizations like the Association of Avian Veterinarians. The more as avian veterinarians we do research and the more we learn about avian medicine, the better we can take care of your pets. So if you support this research, then we can help not just animals in the wild, but most important, those love birds that you have at home. And Rudolf Virchow says that between animal and human medicine, there's no dividing line, nor should there be. And with this, I want to thank everyone for listening to me today, for participating in this webinar, and for supporting Phoenix Landing and the great effort that they do, not just to give better lives to parrots in captivity, but also better lives to parrots in the wild. Thank you so much, and I hope you can enjoy that small video there with amazing scarlet macaws flying in the wild in Peru. And I'm open for any questions now.
I'm sorry, I was watching the video, which having been there a couple of times, it's a really special place. So thank you for sharing that. And I hope everybody listening today, if you haven't been somewhere to see birds, parrots in the wild, that you'll consider doing that in the future, because it really does change the way you perceive your birds when you come home and how far you'll go to make lives better for them. So it's very inspiring to see birds in the wild, not just outside our back door, right? So thank you,
Yeah.
Dr. Dominguez, for such a essential and robust talk about something so important that I just wish more and more people would take an interest in conservation so we can do more to help those wild parrots. And thank you for bringing up avian flu. I know that's on everybody's mind these days. I saw something on 60 Minutes recently where the doctors were saying they thought it was going to get only worse. What is your thoughts on that? And what does it mean for the parrots in our homes? Do we put them outside for air and sunshine or keep them inside? Yeah.
That's a really good question. So unfortunately, flu as a virus is a virus that can mutate really easily. We know that a lot of species get affected. So we know that avian flu can affect also cats and cows and horses and humans and so many other species. Now, there's not a lot of research of how many wild parrots and captive parrots have been actually affected by highly pathogenic avian influenza. We know that avian influenza has two groups, a low pathogenic, so they can have respiratory signs, those kind of things, but most of those birds will survive. And then highly pathogenic avian influenza that is highly contagious and the mortality is really high. So a lot of animals that have that virus will die from it, and also humans will die from it. We know that there's a risk there. Now, knowing that there's a risk there and the risk can be for our captive pets, if we try to keep our captive pets not in close contact with wild birds, we will prevent that risk significantly. A little like what happened with COVID, right? The first measurement was let's stop human contact. Okay, now we have to move to human contact. How do we do it more responsible? Well, let's wear masks, let's wash our hands, let's take some preventive measures to not keep spreading this disease. So with pet birds, we can do the same. We can still give them some baths outside and take them out, and they can still enjoy because that's important for the health of that individual. But we can do it in more responsible ways where we prevent direct contact with wild birds, where if we are somebody that loves also nature and loves going to the state farm, and I have contact with chickens in the state farm, well, I take measurements of cleaning my hands, changing my clothes before I have contact with my bird. So all those things that we have learned now in pet care and parrot care, like how we change our practices of cooking, how we change our practices of making our house safer for our pet birds, we can also be changing some of those practices for not having close contact of some of our captive birds with some of the wild birds.
Do you think it matters that in an outdoor aviary, the wild birds might like land on top of the aviary and, there's poop?
So most of the songbirds and those kind of things, we know that they're not a vector for avian influenza. The biggest risk is with waterfowl. So having wild dogs, wild geese, having contact. Now, unfortunately, now with this new virus that is being spreading, we have seen that some other avian species like hawks and eagles and owls and corvids like crows and those kind of things are being affected, and some of those species have some contact with our captive birds. So we just need to be more mindful about certain practices. There's some easy ways to discourage some of the wild birds to come in contact with our captive birds. There's even like for some hawks, for example, or for some waterfowl, just putting a fake big great horned owl, plastic great horned owl can discourage some of those species to get closer to our animals. Certain types of different cages and nettings and those kind of things can also discourage that.
I remember or heard that before the import laws were in effect in 1992, it was always the pox that was a problem from the migratory birds. What is it about geese and migratory birds like that that always seem to have such a high vector? Is it a different genetic component, or just because they move around? Or
so one is how much they move compared to other species. One other aspect about it is a lot of waterfowl historically and culturally has had closer contact with humans, right? So we are more used to feed waterfowl out in the wild that to be feeding other species. Like normally people would not go out and put rats to feed hawks, right? Or squirrels to feed hawks, but we'll give them bread and corn and all those kind of things to waterfowl. If we see culturally in all the different cultures in all the different countries, everything that we see in terms of paintings of birds, waterfowl is always involved in some of the art and paint. So all of that has made us to be closer to those species. Therefore, those species find sometimes human resources to stay more congregated in certain areas, and that is the perfect example for spread of diseases. That's one factor. But there's also a genetic component where a lot of waterfowl can carry the virus without suffering severe signs of illness.
Mm,
So there are just carriers. You can see a complete healthy goose, but it's also spreading the disease.
interesting. Wow. We have some good questions too. What are some of, you mentioned at the end, some of the resources for learning more about wild birds or helping with conservation. Do you have any favorite references? Like I always think of the World Parrot Trust Encyclopedia. I go to that all the time to learn about.
Yeah. Um, the Parrot Trust is great. I love the
Or
Cornell
no.
Lab because they had gathered so much information for so many other resources, and they put it in an easy way for people to understand, not just the bird that I can see in my backyard, but also a bird from another part of the world that I have no idea how they live and what is their normal natural history and biology of those birds, right? Like sometimes we have, like on my shirt right now, I have Moluccan cockatoos, right? And some
Oh,
people might have it as a pet, and they have no idea how they look in the wild and how they
right.
behave in the wild.
They don't even
We're
know what they
going,
are sometimes. I'm always shocked
yeah,
when they're relinquishing form and they say, oh, it's pink and gray, but I don't know what it is. It's like, what do you mean you don't know what it is? Yeah,
yeah. So going to some of those websites where we can see that information, then supporting them,
right.
really helps conservation.
That's great. Um, you also talked about exit. I don't know how to say it properly. In
Ex
situ
situ.
and ex situ. Do you have any good recommendations for ex situ conservation programs? Because I know Rosemary Lowe has some pretty strong feelings about that. She thinks it gets that breeders sometimes use that as an excuse when they're not really doing the right thing. Yeah.
So again, I think what we need to understand of ex situ conservation is that it needs to be the breed of a population that's going to be viable back into the wild. Breeding animals in captivity just to breed those animals without genetic diversity, without welfare, without the option of those animals returning at some point back into the wild is not exceeded conservation.
Agreed.
That is just aviculture that is breeding these animals
Yeah.
in captivity to demand X or Y supply. Okay.
Mhm.
So there is really few ex situ projects that are actually ex situ conservation, right? So the Sphinx
Mhm.
macaw is a perfect example. So it took
Right.
years,
It did.
years and years to have it in captivity and to keep those genetics and do all these generations, but today we're seeing that success where we can finally have put some of those individuals back into the wild after decades of
And
having them
there's
in
still
captivity.
controversy even on that between the people
No,
who bred them and the people who now care for them. And yeah, there's always politics,
yes.
right? Yeah.
So, but I think we need to learn better those kind of things. And one thing that I didn't share here, but one of the things that you know that I do is I work a lot with law enforcement in terms of seizure of animals through the illegal pet trade and in collections and those kind of things are not doing things right and right for the animals. And sadly, a lot of the times, the forefront that we see looks really pretty and seems that things people are doing things correctly. But when we see what is happening in the back, then we realize that it's not as pretty as what we thought, right? So that's why
Right.
it's so important to, if we are thinking about ex situ conservation, to visit accredited zoos and institutions, those kind of things, because at least they have more eyes on top of them to make sure that they are doing things right.
Yes, we're very proud that we have an animal welfare act inspection with approval and repeated again this week. And I think it's really important, like you said, to see behind the scenes. And Virginia, where you are, at least that state goes the extra mile in our experience to make sure people are following some kind of standards. But and maybe with the
Yeah,
Animal Welfare Act now, other states will follow. But for the most part, we've not seen that happen in a lot of state and local governments. You know, they just
yeah.
don't
So
follow through.
the state of Virginia is the only state in the whole United States that actually has an animal law unit as part of the state to protect the
Yes,
conservation and the welfare of animals.
and they're fierce. And I love that about them. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for being part of that. Yeah. Yeah.
You're welcome.
There's a question about things that we put on our windows and what really works and what doesn't. I know I've had that experience that some things just don't work. What do you recommend?
Yeah. So there's multiple films that we can put in our windows, but if we understand a little bit how birds see the world, then we can understand better what things work or not. So we need to put something in the window that will not allow that bird thinking that it can pass through a space, and that inside that space or on the other side of that space, the bird can get or perch, right? So smaller things like smaller dots that reduce the space visually for those animals help better than just putting, for example, a flying goal on my window and just one, because all the space around it is just a space where that bird knows that it can fly through. There's like, I can, instead of putting my background like this, I can show you in my office what I have.
Mm.
So I'm at work. That's my window of my office. But if you see, it looks really dark, that film. So
Mm-hmm.
from the inside, I can see outside, but anything that is outside cannot see inside. So that's a film that still looks really nice and aesthetic outside in my office. But inside I can still enjoy the outside nature, those kind of things. So it looks natural outside and aesthetic outside, where birds will not think that they can come into my office. And then I can still enjoy watching those trees and the birds and those kind of things. So
Is it a film that goes on the outside of the window or the
it
inside?
goes inside. It goes inside.
And where do you find that? And what's it called?
That was just, it's called an ultraviolet screen film. I bought it on Amazon.
Uh-huh.
There's different degrees of it. This is a lighter one, but if you're from the outside, you just see that we have a nice, like, kind of bluish gray window that doesn't reflect the images of outside. And then from the inside, I can still enjoy everything.
That's great. I have an indigo bunting who insists that he sees himself in the window and taps on it all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Like,
also important. There's a lot of films that also cause reflection, like if it was a mirror. So birds see the same tree that they are standing on, like an opportunity of a
exactly.
tree to fly into. So we just need to think about those things.
That's great. Good to know. Thank you. There's a question about seabirds, and do they fly? How far over the open sea do they fly, or do they follow the coast so they have places to land?
So there's some of them that fly actually no through coastal lines. It depends where is their migration and what type of bird we're talking about. So there's birds that fly from the east coast of the United States to the west coast of Europe, and they are traveling all that ocean, sometimes nonstop. Some of them will stop in little spots or islands, but they can fly thousands and thousands of miles in migration without stopping, a lot of these species.
It's amazing, isn't it? Unbelievable.
Yes.
I mean, birds are magical in general, in my opinion, but things like that are just they're mind blowing, frankly, because
Yeah.
like imagine doing something like that. Yeah. What about solar panels? Are they a problem or?
Sadly, they are.
Oh, that's
Sadly, they are for birds. Okay. They reflect light in a way that affects birds' vision and perception of the world. Uh, they also can hit a lot. For some birds, like loons and grebes, sometimes they appear like water surfaces where the bird can come and land, and for some waterfall when they realize they are crashing into something like a glass of solar panels.
yikes.
So solar panels are small enough in the top of a roof of a house are really helpful. Solar panels for having my little lights in my yard are really helpful, but these huge pieces of land where the land gets destroyed to put huge solar panels and they are big, we actually know that they are not the best in terms of ecologic energy or healthy energy.
Interesting. Yeah, I know that happens a lot here in the Asheville area. Like the Biltmore Estate is very proud that they have put those massive solar panels out to save. Never even thought of that. Thanks, Andario, for that question. someone wants to know where to go in Virginia if you suspect a problem. You want to tell them the best way to do that?
Suspect a problem in terms of animal welfare.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or illegal parrot trade, etc.
The first step, your first step is to the local animal control and the Department of Wildlife Resources. That's your first step. You can move to a higher level if you don't get that response to that, then to contact the Office of the Attorney General directly on the state. But most of the times, local animal controls will take the complaint, and by law in Virginia, in all the localities, they need to do an investigation. Sometimes they close it and it doesn't move forward. Sometimes they continue. Now, sometimes for people, it's frustrated because they feel that on this side of the office, we're not doing a lot of work to help those kind of things. We just want to make sure that every time that there's a complaint, first it's a legit complaint, but once it's a legit complaint, that we gather all the information that we need so we can legally take action for the best of those animals. And that can take some time, right? Because in the cases where I participate, for example, it will not be a good service for the animals just coming, seizing the animal, and then not having a place to move that animal and putting that same animal in the same condition or a worse condition that it has. So
Right.
before I can go and take that animal, it takes months of trying to find placement for potentially those animals. And you, as Phoenix Landing, and a lot of the other parrot
Know that.
adoption
Yeah.
organizations in the country, they're all full. The zoological institutions are full, and the good pet rescue owners that will help organizations like yours are also full. So it
Right.
takes a lot of work and a lot of months of thought of what we're going to do for the best of that animal, regardless of the legal part. We need to do it for the best interest of the animal. So it will be really responsible to take action and then finding out that I have no placement for that animal.
Right. Yeah, we still have some that birds that are under state custody, basically, while they go through the court system, but they're taking up valuable homes that other birds waiting for our help can't fill. At the same
Yeah,
time, we've gone to help groups of birds where maybe the county confiscated whatever, and then the judge says the birds go back to this horrible place. So yeah, but we all have to start somewhere and do what,
somewhere.
right, right. Somebody wants to know about scientific, peer-reviewed, reliable resources for nutrition that address individual species needs. Boy, we could talk about that all day. We all have strong opinions on that, don't we?
There's so much, so much. What I can just share with you guys is it's important what we know about the animals in the wild. No matter how good is our knowledge, there's no way to replicate it in captivity. There's never going to be a way to replicate it in captivity. We try our best, okay? So that's what I can say as a summary is everybody can have different opinions of the diets in captivity based on the research that is being in the wild. Regardless of how good we try, there's no way to replicate the thousands or hundreds of different options that a wild bird has in the wild in terms of nutrition.
Right.
So that's what it makes it so controversial and complicated, right? Because no matter what we do, there's no way. And on top of that, we have to add not just the nutrition is the amount of exercise, the amount of other things like a lot of pet owners tell me like why my pet has so bad cholesterol and liver issues even when my diet seems to be the perfect diet with the perfect pellets, the perfect amount of seeds, fruits, and well, your bird is not flying the amount of that it will do in the wild. So
Right.
even as humans, if we eat perfect but we don't do exercise, your cholesterol will be high.
Mhm.
So there's so much components around it.
Yeah, and we all have different opinions on what's okay to eat and what's not okay to eat. I know every time we get a group of veterinarians together, I always ask something about that because there's a diversity of opinion on eggs or, walnuts or whatever. And of course, we know from
Yeah.
a cactus, they have a whole different motility digestive system. So again, anybody out there with the eclectus, join us on June 1st for Dr. Marshall from Australia to learn about his comprehensive new thoughts on that. But I also
Yeah.
wanted to mention that I write a monthly column for Lefebvre on conservation, a blog.
Mhm.
And I'm always looking for projects or species. I call it the global parrot. So if anybody listening today or to the recording in the future has a particular species and you want to know more about what's the status of that species in the wild, let me know, because I'm always looking for new ones to feature. And then Lefebvre donates $500 to that cause. So it's a win-win for everybody. So
Yeah.
and of course, this is from Brazil, this wonderful red and green macaw. And we have echo tours every year. So if anybody's ever interested in joining us, just email us and we'll let you know what's coming up. So, well, any closing thoughts for us today from this very important topic?
I think the message that I want all of you to take today is two things. Every time you do better for your pet bird, you're doing better for conservation. But every time that you are also helping something in the field for conservation is giving back something to that bird that you have at home.
Makes me want to cry. It's true. And there's so many things at risk in the world today that if we parrot people don't help our beloved parrots in the wild, who else will? So do a little something, everybody, please. So, okay. I'm so grateful for your time.
Thank you so much, Anne, for the
Knowledge
invitation.
and working with us and the birds that we have in your area. You're a gem. So thank you very much. And
thank you.
Hope to see you again soon. Are you going to AAV this year?
I don't know yet.
Yeah, there's so many demands on our lives these days, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hear you. Well, thanks again. And I hope to see you in person again too. So thanks everybody for being here and join us again. We have 2 events in June. June 1st is Dr. Marshall from Australia. And June, I forget the date, 14th or something, Jenny is joining us to talk about biting matters and her book. So good, always good to talk about behavior. So thanks again, everybody. See you soon. Bye.